Welcome to this next webinar in our webinar series on how to master the Google Admin Console. I see that there are still some people joining us. That's absolutely perfect. Thank you so much for joining us. Please keep your microphones muted so that that doesn't interfere with this webinar. We are giving multiple webinars over the course of a few months, and this specific webinar we will go into more depth about how to set up and manage Chrome specifically. We have about an hour to talk about that, and specifically, I also want to reserve some time for any questions that you may have and things you may specifically want me to look into or maybe give some advice on. So even though that I would really like you to keep your microphone muted during the session, it would be very nice of you if you have any questions. Do feel free to put them down in the chat, like my colleague says just now. Thank you so much. So yeah, do let us know if there's anything specific that you would like to know or you would like us to cover, and we'll be sure to make time for that. I have made a general timetable of how I plan to fill this session. So this is what kind of my schedule will be, but depending on how quickly we will go through certain parts, maybe this will shift a little bit. So let's start off with what is it that you're currently watching? Well, we have started this webinar series, and we are currently doing a 10-part free webinar series that you can register yourself for. And in this 10-part webinar series, we will prepare people on how to use the Google Admin Console, and every single webinar will be centered around one specific topic. Of course, we started at entry level already with some more of the basics, fundamental administrator tasks. But there's always room for Q&A. You can always ask your questions. And besides the fact that we just show you and tell you how you can use it, we also like to share our knowledge and experience with you on how we tend to help schools with IT in education, and in particular with how to set up your Google Admin Console. If there are any particular topics you would like us to cover in the future, do let us know, because there are still some things that we can fill in based on your wishes. So currently, you are watching the third installment of this webinar series. The previous ones that we have given, you can see here listed, the first impression, how to manage your Google apps. And in June, you see that we will cover on how you can manage the Google Workspace apps, just generally apps within your Google Workspace environment. While in July, we will cover how to manage your Apple, Android, and Windows devices. So different devices than any Chrome devices that you may have. And there will be more dates because a 10-part webinar series doesn't stop at 5, obviously. And indeed, if you would like to see me full screen, you can go to the list of participants and select me to pin me so you can see me full screen. So let's start off with who I am. Hi, my name is Leon. I work for the company called Cloudwise, the creator of the Cool School platform. And here at Cool, I work as a consultant and trainer. And mainly my job consists of helping schools on finding ways how they can use IT within education. And as a Google certified trainer, I make sure that I help teachers and teaching staff, but also the school leaders and administrators, how they can best use all the tools at their disposal. Now, we personally really have always worked from a question, really, and that is actually stemming from the fact that we find that IT tends to be complicated and tends to be time-consuming. And especially for people within education, IT is not fun because it's not their core business. It's not the core thing that you do. What you prefer to do as a teacher is just teaching. So what we always do is ask ourselves the question, can we make IT more efficient and easy to use without extra hassle and great expenses that usually come with that? Now, we've successfully been able to do that by helping schools in different ways. One of them being that we help them by simply transferring knowledge and helping them with their professional development on how they can use, for example, the Google Apps within their classroom. Um, but we also do it in a way that we do on-site support, helping them with their complete IT infrastructure, ranging from telephone, VoIP installations to printing and Wi-Fi. But mainly what most of our schools and our schools like to use that we have created is our own developed education platform called Cool, which is essentially something that helps the teacher and the students on a daily basis make sure that the entire digital learning is more streamlined and gives the teacher more tools to not only stay in control, but also just simply make things easier and give them more agency. And we do that for over 1,600 schools around the world, for over 270,000 users. And we're very happy with the fact that our customers are very happy with the service we provide. We think that's actually a very normal thing to do, to be ready when there's a question and to help people who are stuck. And apparently people like that very much about us, that we're very pragmatic in that sense. So we're very happy that if people have a question, they are able to find us, reach out, and we help them where we can. Now, let's create some context. Of course, we cannot discount COVID-19 in the current day and age, because still, despite the fact that things are definitely looking up, we see that in many countries, the schools are closed down by the government, so there are very heavy restrictions still, and it might still last for quite a few months that we are still in this extraordinary situation. But we've seen that education really needed to adapt to enable forms of distance learning, because the schools were closed down. Students suddenly needed to be able to follow education from home in some form or another. And that could pose a challenge to a lot of schools, especially when you lack the expertise on how to set that up and how to facilitate that. But also, of course, if you don't have the infrastructure to make that happen, which can be as quote unquote simple as not having the devices at your disposal at that moment. So then today we're going to talk about how to manage the Chrome apps, the Chrome users, and what that exactly means. Well, we'll get to that, because we're just going to dive right in after this introduction. So I already have a few things open, and just for the sake of it, I am going to just show you from the very beginning. I presume that you will be logged in, you have access to an administrator account, but what I can do here is, because in my Cool portal I have the admin dashboard, I can immediately go there as long as I log in again, of course, security first and all that. And then I'm signed in to the dashboard. Now, when we are talking about managing Chrome, there's a few things that I need to explain before I can actually go into certain settings, because I don't know of the start knowledge, what currently the baseline is of everyone who is watching this and has joined the webinar. But to manage Chrome, we go to Devices. So let's start off with this overview, because I feel like this overview can sometimes already confuse people, especially when they are new to the Google Admin Console. We have a few larger tiles in the middle, and we have to the left a sidebar with menu options. Now, what we can see here is that there are different types of things we can manage within the Google Admin Console. We see here that we could manage mobile devices, endpoints, Chrome devices, manage browsers, and specific hardware like Google Meet hardware setups or Jamboard devices. Most often, we find that, of course, schools use Google Chrome devices, meaning that you have Chromebooks, Chromeboxes, or Chrome bases, which are enrolled within your environment. With enrolled, I mean that they have been bound essentially to your Google Workspace environment as a dedicated device for that environment. If I click this tile now, then you will find that I have a pretty long list. It's not that long for a school, maybe, because I've seen schools that have thousands of devices registered. But here we can see we have 60 Chrome devices, and we see some basic details like the serial number, in which organizational unit they're currently placed in, and when they were enrolled, when they had their last sync to get their policies, and which user enrolled them in the first place. Now, to be able to enroll a device, the process itself to enroll is not that difficult. Some of you may have done it yourself. There is a keyboard combination that you use, and then you fill in credentials that are allowed to enroll a device. And that's essentially just a login step, and then they are enrolled if you have available licenses. So your environment can only enroll new devices, new Chrome devices, if you have the Google Chrome upgrade licenses. These allow you to manage Chrome devices remotely and from this central admin console. There are schools that opt out to do it that way, and they say, no, we just use essentially the consumer environment, and any of the settings we do, we only do on user level. But with some of the things I'm going to talk about today, you will find that it is quite restrictive and also makes it a lot harder for you in general, I feel like, as an admin, to really customize it in a way that works well for your school and your setup. Now, if I would simply click on one of the devices, you will find that there's a few things I can see here. Mostly if this is technical, you'll find that we can add or edit custom fields, which are mainly changed and altered to make sure that you can, at a later time, easily search based on these custom fields. And we can see some activity. If we want to move them, we see that we can move them to a different organizational unit. We can reset them remotely, which is very useful, especially when we find that the memory usage or the disk space usage is very high, because a lot of different users have been making use of the same device, and all those profiles have been adding up and filling up the hard drive. Then we can say reset, and it will remove all of the local user data. Now, because everything is still stored in the cloud, that shouldn't impact the users that much. If they have saved things in Drive, for example, then they're absolutely fine. But this is mainly about, for example, any apps that were installed and anything that would have been saved locally on the device's downloads folder. We also have an option to disable the device and to deprovision the device. Now, the difference is that with disable, the device is still managed, but what we say is that from that point on, it can no longer be used to log in. The disabling is meant as a way for stolen devices to be restricted to log in with, so that they essentially become unusable until they are returned to your school, which is obviously what we would very much like to have. While deprovisioning, we do when a Chromebook is sent away for repairs and is found to be you can no longer repair the device because it is permanently damaged, or you have devices that first were enrolled in your environment, but after the students have used them during their entire school period, their entire time that they attended the school, then with deprovisioning, we can take them out of the environment to make sure that your students can actually have their personal device without it's still being managed in this admin console. So it really becomes their device from that point onward. And these are really some more of the basic things of what we can find within the device itself. And I feel like that is, in terms of the management of Chrome devices, not that interesting. So what I'll do is go all the way back to devices, or I could do it from the main menu, obviously, and go to devices here. I'll find it here. So we have Chrome devices, then we have endpoints, we have managed browsers and mobile devices. And all of these are different types of devices we could manage, but I'll mainly focus today on Chrome devices and a little bit on managed browsers. Now, if we want to go to the settings for Chrome, then one of the things that is important to know is that to the left here, we have Chrome. And if we click on it, then it actually shows us all of the Chrome options and settings. By default, mobile and endpoints is actually expanded. For now, I will simply go to settings. Now you see we have options for users and browsers, devices, and managed guest sessions. Besides that, we have that under Chrome, we see devices and managed browsers, and we can set apps and extensions, printers, and reports. Now, apps and extensions will be covered in next month's webinar. So if you would like to know more about how to set that up, how you can delegate those to your students or your staff, do also subscribe and register for that one. But for now, I will go and at least go and explain what the difference is between these three types of places where we can do any changes. Okay, so if we open any of those three, we see here that it's essentially the same screen we see, but we can select one of those tabs and it will open the specific settings that are assigned to the specific settings and policies tab. And it's separated between users and browsers, device settings, and managed guest sessions. So let's start off with that before I go into any settings that I might find useful for any admin to really know about. So user and browser settings. Let's start with that. User and browser settings are settings that are active the moment that a student or a teacher logs into a Chrome device, or they are logged in and have their account synced to a Chrome browser. So one of the things that you could do, even if you don't use Chrome, is have someone log into their Chrome profile, as I have done here. As you can see, I've logged in. I've logged in with several accounts, as you can tell, but I have logged in with a specific account. Sync is turned on, which means that it will automatically get all of the policies that have been set under the users and browsers settings. It's also possible to have managed browsers, as you just saw one of the tiles displaying. So what does that do? Well, the difference with that is that instead of having people logged in with their own personal profile, we could also have a Chrome browser on a different device that we then actually add and roll into our Google Admin Console. By doing so, any of the settings that we do here would automatically be placed, would be in effect on the device, no matter which user would then start using that browser. So it gives a extra level of control, essentially, because you can set a baseline of settings, and then when a student or a teacher logs in, then they still have their own personalized environment with their own bookmarks, perhaps, and their own apps and extensions. But there's a baseline of what you would do on that browser. Now, device settings are things that are always active no matter which user logs in. So the user browser settings really is something that we enforce on users or a managed browser, while a device setting is something we do on a device. Okay, so far that seems pretty logical. But it also means that we sometimes have to think about which setting is a user setting and what setting is a device setting. Because device settings, for example, could mean that we say there are specific ways that you can log in, or I prohibit login on this device. While a user setting could be, I want your browser to always open a specific web page when you start up your browser or log in. So that is the main difference really between those two. But then we have managed guest sessions. The name for this has changed over time. Managed guest sessions sometimes is always referred to as the kiosk mode. And the idea behind this is that this is a mode we can activate for devices to make sure that the moment my students want to use a device, it's essentially a environment where they don't need to log into their Google profile. So mainly what you would use this for is in a library or any place where you have public devices and you do not want or need guests to log in to make use of the internet or any other services that you make available that way. The main reason you would do this is to make sure that you have an easier way for guests to log in to specific devices. And based on the managed guest session, as we can see here, we can set certain restrictions and limitations based on what is, according to our schools and organizations policy, warranted to be able to be used. And there are a lot of settings that I can walk through. There's a lot of settings that I will skim over during this webinar because there's simply so much that I could go into that I think we could fill more than 3 hours based on just all the settings alone. And it is not just obviously about the Chrome settings, but also mobile device management. That's one of the reasons we want to cover that in a completely separate webinar. But the same counts for security, etc. If we go to users and browser settings, device settings, or managed guest session settings, first of all, as always, do please make sure that you pick the right organizational unit before you start making any changes. Now, as some of you who may have joined our previous webinars have seen, there are several ways, of course, you could structure and organize your organization. I find that there are mainly 2 different ways you could structure your organization if you organize it based on a district. One of them being we have the district and then separate schools with underneath it an organizational unit based on devices, employees, and students, maybe with more sub-organizations underneath it. Or we have the district and then all the devices, and then we specify it for which school they are. If we do any settings, we have to be mindful of where we do it. Now, I say this in particular because there are two types of settings that only work on devices, while this one only works on users. If we do user and browser settings, we do that on employees or students, or maybe for the entire organization. While device settings and managed guest sessions, that is something we do for devices specifically. And the reason that I like to keep devices and all of the other users separate in our structure is to make sure that you always know where to go to change any of the settings that you have done for devices. So in this case, I'm going to start off with user and browser settings. And I want some general settings to be done for District A. So one of the things that we can do, and I will also keep something handy here, is that we can do certain things like, okay, how long should the session take? Or do we want to upload a custom avatar or a custom wallpaper so that it is in line with the style of our school. In general, do we want them to be able to sign into their browser, or do we want to enforce this? Now, this is something that is easily read over. Certain applications, like, for example, our own monitoring system, is something that, if you would use it in certain situations, requires to sign into a browser. Now, if we set it here that we force users to sign in to use the browser, it will automatically collect and download and update the policies that have been set within this environment, so that they get the extensions, bookmarks, and all of the other things that we set as a policy here. For now, I just leave it as is, but this is one of those things that is quite easily overlooked, and I feel like is good to know about. Let's see. Well, there's a lot of things that you'll find me just scrolling past that is not really important. A rather small thing to me, but that can really save you some time, is what to do with the enrollment. If you would enroll Chrome devices yourself, then it now says keep Chrome device in the current location. I can also change it to place Chrome device in user organization. The reason why you want to do that possibly is that, as we like to do that, is to have a account that we specifically use for enrolling Chromebooks. Now, then we get the Chromebooks, we enroll them, and normally new devices will always be placed in our root level. But if we have several schools within District A that we are managing, and we have 10 Chromebooks for School 1, 10 Chromebooks for School 2, and 10 Chromebooks for School 3, then you would have to separate that within the YAML console by first going to the root layer, then deciding and finding, hey, which of the serial numbers are the ones that are for School 1, School 2, or 3. Instead, if we would make a separate enrollment account for School 1, 2, and 3 and place them in the proper organizational unit, and we set place Chrome device in user organization, then this would, yes, thank you. This would make sure that the devices are automatically placed in the right organizational unit when you use the right account to enroll them with. This could simply save you quite some time, and makes it easier for you to keep an overview of where the devices should be without requiring a action after the fact. Just in general, do I allow users to enroll new devices, or will I just say only teachers and employees are allowed to enroll devices? And if I scroll further down, there are a few things underneath security, that I would like to highlight. So one of the things here is the locking of the screen and the idle settings, which kind of go hand in hand for me. Right now, it says that locking of the screen is not allowed. Basically, meaning that if I would leave my device unattended and I'm still logged in, then I would have to really log myself out, or someone would be able to access my device. Is it something that you would want? In certain cases, we have found that we needed to, due to some technical, not so much restrictions, but it was a better situation. And to paint you the picture, if you have students that are 4 years, 5 years old, and you have them logged in, you don't want them by accident to lock their screen. It's as simple as that. There can just be situations where it would be really annoying, where students would, even by accident, lock their screen, would have to restart the Chromebook completely and then log themselves in again, possibly with the help of a teacher. Unless, of course, you have a certain way of logging in that does not require an email address and a password, like a picture login or QR login, which we could facilitate with the Cool portal. But another thing is the idle settings, because one of the things that I also frequently hear back is my Chromebooks of my students are constantly being logged out while I'm doing my instruction. And then finally, when they are allowed to continue with their assignments, they have to log in again. Now we can set here how long we would want a user session to be active for. So if you would set this, it would remain empty. I believe the default is actually not that long. I think it's about 10 minutes. So instead I could set it to 30 minutes instead. And then what should it do when we have passed that 30-minute mark? We can say it goes into sleep mode, meaning if I press a button, it will immediately start up again, essentially, as if it wasn't actually turned off, but it goes into a power saving mode. We log out, or we go to the lock screen. Same for action on lid close. Do we want to log out, or do we want to sleep? And can the user decide what happens when we lock the screen on sleep? Do I want, after the device goes out of sleep mode, do I want it to show the lock screen, or just immediately be ready again for the user to use once more? These are some small, essentially simple things that I find that almost every admin encounters when they at least also start using Chromebooks, because this is something that can be quite an annoyance to teachers and students alike. All right, then a few other interesting points. So we have the Incognito Mode, browser history, clear browser history, force and Empharical mode, and those are essentially things that have to do with a type of security and managing of your students. We personally almost always disallow the Incognito mode for a very simple reason, and that is mainly when we use the Incognito mode, any of the data that would be collected, browser history, but also any apps and extensions, any policies that you've set on specific accounts is then no longer active. Many technical applications that would allow you to monitor a student, for example, or check their progress will have no grip, will be able to not view an incognito screen. But I feel like one of the biggest issues is that the sole reason why you would allow an incognito mode is if there is a problem with the current profile of a user, which impairs them in the usage of their device. I personally use the incognito mode only when I quickly have to log in as a separate account to test something or to show it during one of my training sessions. But for a student, really, there's not a reason you would want that. Rather, maybe you would want them to be able to log in with a separate account while they're already logged in with their student account, their school account. And the incognito mode would actually cancel out a lot of the policies that you would set here. So that's pretty important to know. Browser history, we always choose to save it, just because if in the future there's something that happened and students are saying, no, that is not something that I did, it is nice to just have it on by default. You might, if you really want to be sure that you can check what student activity, what students have done, that you don't allow them to clear their browser history themselves. So it will always be saved, so that if at a time there is something bad that happened, you can at least check it later. The force Empharical mode says here, erase local data when the browser is closed. There are some benefits to using it that way. So when you would go and say, I want to use this mode, it would make sure that any of the profile data, so like I've done here, I have a lot of accounts currently logged in. Every time I close my browser, it would be removed, it would be forgotten. It's a great way to make sure that people can't just access your account when you close your browser and walk away for a moment, because you would have to really log in again and make sure that you connect your account to your Chrome browser to continue working. The downside of that is that every time you would close your entire Chrome browser, you would have to log in again. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, but if you use this, it's a very good way to ensure an extra step of security on your on the device you're using. So if we go further down, like I said, I'm not going to go through all of them. You'll find a lot of things that have to do with some more technical stuff, like certificates and security. Let's see, Chrome cleanup. Go. And then we get to proxies. This is probably pretty difficult to look at, so my apologies for that. I also know that on my side, it's actually a bit slow on scrolling through the list. But you can also immediately tell, I presume, why I'm not going over every single one of these settings, because it's just simply so much that it's hard to really, really just go into depth on every single one of these. But this one I did want to talk about. This is, I feel like, really one of those things that you as an admin should also know about. It is just simply how to set a default homepage or a default start page when your students log in. And because what we can do here is make sure that right now it says always show a home button. By default, this will be set to allow the user to decide. Set in home page. Currently it says allow the user to configure, but I can also say I want it to go to a specific URL. So for example, I could go and say I want to copy a URL in here. And that means that now, that's a lot of fun. I see that's actually a redirect. So instead, pool.cloudwise.app, which would connect you to our login service for our cool application. And that would be the place you go to the moment that you go to the homepage. Well, that's one. What kind of page should open when they open a new tab? Should it be suggested? But also, what pages should be loaded on startup? And this could be several lines of URL. So if you have multiple web pages that are very useful for your school and that you know are used on a daily basis, this is a great way to facilitate that, because it will make sure that every single time they log in, this is immediately what they get in front of them without having to go to their browser and open those pages manually. The way that this really helps is that if you as a school have a centralized platform to help you facilitate and streamline this whole educational process, so whether it is that you use Classroom or you have Moodle or you use Cool or any other kind of landing page, essentially, maybe even the school page or an intranet page that you want your teacher staff to look at every single day. And this is a great way to do that, just to make sure it automatically opens, and that could save everyone a lot of time. For the importing of Chrome profile data, we see here that we could even specify which things we want to always enforce to be loaded. But I will skip that and I'll go to some safe search and restricted mode options. Because what we can set here is something that really could help you and your school in making sure that your students cannot do searches that show graphical content. So right now it says do not enforce safe search options. You could also enforce this, that the users can only do safe search options and cannot turn this option off the moment that they actually go to the search results. The same goes for YouTube. You can put YouTube in restricted mode for particular users. And this can be very useful to just already filter out a lot of the results that are not educational and really just have entertainment value. but it is also something that you might want to use when you want to protect your students from certain agents. Now, to be fair, we have experienced that setting the restricted mode on YouTube makes it hard to really find what kinds of things it exactly blocks with the two different levels that you just saw. So that would be something that you would have to try and see if that is something that helps you prevent students, for example, watching certain content you don't want them to watch on YouTube. Now, going further down, we find that we can set essentially a whitelist for cookies, or a whitelist for images, or a blacklist for images, and all kinds of things that could help make sure that the usage of certain pages just is streamlined. For example, I have here pop-ups of xlearning.nl are allowed, making sure that every single time a student or a teacher goes to this web page, and it normally would trigger a pop-up, they don't every single time have to allow the pop-up to show a new page. Instead, it will automatically allow this, and immediately when they click the button, show this new page, so they can continue with their with their modules. And there is a lot more in here. Honestly, there's just so much more in here. There is the Google Drive for Desktop application. Do we allow them to use that? Do we allow them to sync over mobile connections on their mobile phones? Can they cast to Chromecast or even smart TVs? There's just a lot in there that we could all do on user and browser settings. I will quickly go to device settings, even though I'm not completely done, because I think that if I would continue this way, I really will not be done in time, because there's some things. No, let's first save these changes. Some things under device settings that I feel like also just really are useful to know about. One of them being, of course, what happens after we have power washed them. So the act of power washing a Chrome device is making sure that we remove all of the local data, and that it immediately it becomes a clean device, quite literally. That's why it's called power wash, which makes sure that any of the localized data is removed. But depending on your situation, you may want to not have the power wash actually make the device be removed as a provision device from your environment. Instead, we force the device to be automatically be re-enrolled after wiping it. This would prevent a student to remove a device from your environment and then take it home, and then suddenly you cannot see it anymore because it is no longer connected to your admin console. We can set a personalized disabled message for any disabled devices, but this is really what I also wanted to talk about. So under the device settings, we have some options for the login process. And one of the things that I also find is very important is to decide whether or not you allow guest mode, obviously, but also sign-in restrictions. So sign-in restrictions are pretty important, because at a school, normally, you probably don't want students to log in with any other account than their school account, right? So when we set it here, we can set the domain of your school. For example, as it says here, an asterisk at cloudwise, edu.cloudwise.nl or cooldemo.eu. And then only the users of that specific domain are allowed to log into the devices that are in this organizational unit or any of the subdomains that I would put it on. As I mentioned before, it would be nicer to put it on just the devices level, or if you structure it like District B, we do it on the devices level there. But for now, I'll just leave it like this, because just to keep some pace in the webinar. We also can set an autocomplete for the domain name. And this is really nice because, especially if we have a pretty long domain that our students would have to use to log in with their account, we can simply autofill this as a prefix. Then they only have to fill in their prefix username, and then they use their password and they're logged in It's just a really, really nice addition to making sure that your students log in easier. Not even your students, also for staff, they find this very nice. And then we have the sign-in screen, where by default it always shows usernames and photos. Now, this means that if we have multiple people that use the same device, you will see these avatar-like pictures that you can click. Then you just need to fill in your password and you're logged in again. These are essentially locally saved profiles of the previous users. If you would set this to never show usernames and photos, you don't see who the previous users were, and you will always see the page where you can log in with your email address and your password, and you can log in that way. But one of the arguments that I've heard quite often with enrolling student Chromebooks, student-owned Chromebooks, is that then we enforce all kinds of settings on their devices. We manage it as a school while it is their privately owned device. Okay, there's something to be said about that. I think that's still pretty fair. But one of the things you can do as a school, and specifically you as an admin, is decide when you want to set the device off hours. Now, it doesn't mean that we say, I want the devices to be off between these hours. What this does is say between these hours, the device policies will not be active. What does that mean exactly? Now, what that means is that if I say here, I only want people from edu.cloudwise.nl to be able to log in, and I then add a set of hours, then I can say per day between which period this is not restricted. What that essentially means is that during school hours, they are restricted to only log in with their school account, while outside of that, when they are at home, or at least between those hours where there should not be school hours, they are allowed to log in with their private Gmail account. They can use the guest mode, and they're not restricted by any of the settings we do here. And this is a very nice compromise, I feel like, to make sure that you can still manage the Chrome devices for your school, but also make sure that if they are privately owned, they retain all their benefits of being able to use their personalized accounts outside of school. And again, we see here that we can set a wallpaper, but also that we can automatically erase local data. The erasing of local data on device level, I feel like, is mostly useful in the situation where we have shared devices. So we have a cart with many Chrome devices that are just shared between different students that have to log in on them. And we don't want them, as we could do remotely, and clean them up, is that they fill up their hard drive with all those profiles. Or maybe that the startup page with all those pictures and usernames are displayed of all the 20 previous students that have logged into the Chromebook. Then what I could do is say I want to erase all local user info the moment that I log out of my device, essentially cleaning it up after every single use. Also, a question that is often asked, and I think that my colleague actually makes a good point. One of the things that is usually confusing to users is that when we have this prefix set, that people ask, but am I only restricted now to edu.cloudwise.nl email addresses? No, luckily not. If you would start just filling in the prefix and then we type the @ symbol, you will find that we can just continue typing and add the domain name of the email address you want to use to log in with, and still just log in that way. The only thing that this does is just to help with the autocomplete of the email. What you will find under device settings are any of the default settings you want to set, and this can range from Are they allowed to use their cameras? Are they allowed to use the microphones? Can you access any USB devices that are plugged into your Chrome device? While in the user and browser settings, it really is something that has more to do with, do I whitelist or blacklist certain web pages or certain content? You'll find, though, that there is just a lot that we could set here. There's really a lot of settings that both for the user and browser settings and device settings you could set in all kinds of different scenarios. One particular example is that if you want to do exams, there are certain regulations for that. For example, a student should not be allowed to use a spelling checker, or to have access to internet, or have access to USB ports and drives. That those are things that you maybe want to set on a specific organizational unit on the device settings, and make sure that all of that is prohibited. We also found that doing it that way usually involves having you as an admin do a lot of work. Every single time that there is a period where you would have to go and prepare these devices for an exam or for a test, then you would have to make sure that you move any of the devices from their original spot to the organizational unit where you put all the specific settings that are set for doing those exams or tests. Now, if you always are available for your teachers and your staff, that's great. But we also found that it is not a very flexible way to work. That is the reason that mainly what we have personally found is that setting restrictions in device settings or user settings beyond the things that we've already showed you don't really happen that often, because mainly what we have done with our platform is make sure that we have a separate exam app that students can use and log into a secure environment. And for all the other things, we tend to use our monitoring feature when the students are using their devices, to make sure that a teacher can monitor and kind of guide their lessons. Now, one small thing I still would like to add about Chrome devices is that there's a recent development with Google. They're working on a way to make sure that it is more easy to actually add Chrome devices to your environment. If we now go to, for example, District A, School 1, and 2 devices, you see now that I have all the provisioned devices, which is just the one. But I can create a zero-touch enrollment token. The idea behind zero-touch enrollment is that you can make sure that a recognized reseller could order Chrome devices for you, and without you or them having to actually touch the devices, that's why it's called zero-touch, they are enrolled in your environment, granted that you have enough upgrade licenses to do so. That could save you a lot of time if you do it that way. So I hope you will benefit from now knowing that it is possible. Then for now, I will quickly go to the presentation again and make sure that we can hop into the Q&A. So what can we do for you? There's several things we can do for you. We provide a Google Workspace advice and insight, of course, but we also have our all-in-one easy-to-use school platform called Cool. Now, you can access that yourself if you want. Cool has many integrations with different parts that you might already use. For example, we can provision accounts within your Google environment. We have a Google Classroom integration. We have an easy way to log in for students of a younger age. So as you can see, there's really a lot of things that Cool can offer you. And what we can provide you with is our distance learning toolkit, which consists of a page where you find our manuals, any recorded webinars, and some of our best practices that you can use within your school. Now, not only can you get one free online training on distance learning from us, but you can also use our Cool portal for free. Some of the features within the Cool portal normally would obviously have a subscription fee to them. You could use now for 90 days for free to try all of it out and see for yourself if that is something that you as a school could benefit from. So if you want to request the free distance learning toolkit, we'll make sure that the link is posted in the chat shortly. And then if there are any more questions, do feel free to put them down in the chat so that we start with the Q&A. Also, if you have any other questions, you see our account details or contact details on the screen. So do feel free to reach out to us if there's anything you think we can help you with. For now, thank you so much for joining us on this webinar, and hopefully I'll see you next month on the next webinar, where we will go into more depth on how to manage the apps within your Google Workspace environment.